All right, we have a new project in the shop. This is Project Pleasure Island. We got a 2011 Ford Taurus. It might have taken a little joyride over a little island divider, and it might have tore a few things up. Number one, it needs an engine. This engine is seized up solid because, I'll show you, there's a little rip in the oil filter and it blowed all the oil all over the road. So that's why we have it. It needs an engine. I'm going to have to get it up in the air and figure out what else might have been damaged. I am concerned about the bend in the radiator and in the AC condenser, but it still holds. Never lost any pressure there. So we'll see about getting that replaced. And let's see what else. My big concern is because the engine is seized so bad, I don't know if I will be able to roll it over to get the torque converter bolts out. And that's my concern. So I'm going to have to end up dropping the cradle here, pull the engine out, and get familiarized with how to get an engine out of this car efficiently. So then I can go to the junkyard and do it all there without the comfort of my shop, without the comfort of being able to drop an engine maybe and get the cradle back underneath the car. Because my local U-Picket is called LKQ, and they weld a spare wheel and a spare wheel, and that's a jack stand. So there's probably 16 inches underneath every vehicle from the get-go. And I'll have to push a little gantry crane on wheels and get that over the car, pick up on the engine, drop the cradle, and then pull it out. Unless I can use a Sawzall and just knock the front clip right off. We'll see. We'll see what I can find, but I want to get used to pulling engines out of these things before I go try it in a driveway. There's a couple things that are up here that are bent. This looks like maybe an oil cooler line or maybe a power steering cooler. I definitely want to check that out. AC condenser, radiator. It's well oiled. We got some insulation that's a little loose, but that's no big deal. The maybe fuel controller, that little cover got blown apart a little bit, but that's not a big deal either. Otherwise, this is a pretty nice looking vehicle. The tires are meh. This one up here has been curbed a couple times. There's a few chunks out of the sidewall that I don't like. So, why do we have this? Sometimes on family trips, we need something a little bit better than an 8-mile-to-the-gallon truck. And I got a kid who's starting to drive, and it'd be a good idea if she had just a normal vehicle to learn driver's training stuff. So it's just going to be kind of a spare family vehicle, and it'll just get used, you know. Whoever uses it maintains it. Fill the gas tank up when you're done. Change the oil once in a while. Things like that. And maybe someone will learn something. So there's one more thing I've got to keep in mind. And when I'm using my tools in the shop to pull the engine out of this car, I need to keep track of the things that I'm going to be needing in a junkyard. Because I don't want to have to go back and forth to make trips, to lose time, to maybe lose an engine. Starting with one of these. I've talked about these before. This is just like a paint opener. But these things work wonders for popping those little button clips out, the ones that have a center. And another little piece of handy tool is going to be some electrical pliers. Sometimes things get stuck. There we go. So I'm going to have to pop out the inner fender well, everything I can to get to that crankshaft so I can spin it over. This one here, I'm just going to put a big old pry bar on it and see if I can force it over. If not, I can get to kind of the oil pan. I might have to drop some of the exhaust. I could loosen some of them caps on the crankshaft. Maybe that'll get it freed up. But I'm going to start with a big pry bar. Wait a minute here. There's no tires on these things at the junkyard, so I can pull those off. Alright, I got a confession to make. I don't know if this is going to work or not. This crank bolt only has an 18 millimeter head. So I've got a socket on it, and I'm afraid I might snap the bolt. But I gotta find out. So that's that. I guess I gotta take a little bit more plastic off as well. Just a little bit. Alright. I have my crank bolt accessible. I've got a long breaker bar, and I'm going to give it a whirl. Oh. This ain't good news. Ooh. Got it to spin backwards. About that far. Oh, that still isn't good. Not good at all. Well, there goes that. I broke the bolt loose. I didn't break the bolt, it just broke loose. Alright, I got a couple ideas here. I could try to drop that pan. I could pull the spark plugs, maybe see if I can reduce any compression. I could worry about it later. But it is kind of here and anchored. I don't really want to pull the engine out with the torque converter still on. I want to separate the engine and transmission. I'm going to think about this for a minute. So I ended up going ahead and pulling this Y pipe off right here. The nuts were so rusted that I just cut the studs. I'll end up driving the studs out and replacing those with new ones. It's just one of those things that you just have to do sometimes. There was literally no way to get a socket on there. I could pound and it just rounded off. One of the nuts was so rusted that I ended up just hitting it off with a punch. So that's out of the way. I found my access here for the torque converter bolts and was able to pry it a little bit to the left again. And so between being able to pry it here and then rotate it forward here, I kind of got a little bit of movement. So I'm going to go ahead and drop it back down, pull the spark plugs out, maybe even shoot a little juice in there if I can, and see if I can hit the starter a couple times. And even if I've got to hit the starter, spin it back, hit the starter, spin it back, I want to see if I can get it to roll over. I really don't care about any damage done to the engine. I just want to be able to save the transmission if I can. And that's the best way I can think of. So that's what I'm going to do. Okay, I've got that crank bolt right there backed out as much as I can without the bolt actually undoing. I've got some spark plugs out. I got some WD-40 in those holes. And I'm going to just hit the key and see what happens. Well, I'm thinking if the battery's charged up a little more, it might actually roll over. It looked pretty promising that it's not completely seized. Now that it cooled down, I would never try to start it and run it. But at least I know I'll be able to get those torque converter bolts out. That's the whole point of all of this. So I noticed this. Other than all that corrosion, the battery cap is loose. And my guess is that it took a little bit of a ride when it ran over Pleasure Island. And so I'm going to just disconnect it, see if I can clean up those terminals, top it off, charge it up, and start again with a good fresh battery, clean terminals, all that jazz. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit that key again and see what happens. I got the charger on. Let's give it a rip. Well, good news. Hitting the crank is turning it over just a little bit at a time. And I've gotten 2 of the 3 flex plate to torque converter bolts out. So I basically have to get maybe like 120 more degrees of rotation on the crank, and I should be able to get that 3rd bolt. Well, I made it, and I can tell because I can wiggle that wrench back and forth and make a clunk. So once I get this torque converter bolt out, then it's all sunshine and rainbows from here.